Welcome to this afternoon's edition of TABC Talks. My name is Martin Wilson. I'm the Assistant General Counsel. Today's topic is rulemaking proceedings and stakeholder participation. Let's talk about some of the ground rules and just background information, disclaimers. The agency guidance was developed to improve internal and external communications and ensure a more consistent application of the TABC statutes and rules. The guidance reflects appropriate processes, requirements, and interpretations based on general situations presented. The guidance may not apply to every situation. And let me also say that the guidance is always in flux as we decide and determine that there are better ways to do things to get more participation. We will certainly adapt to those. If you have questions about how this guidance applies to your specific circumstances, please contact the TABC directly. This presentation, by the way, will be available on the Commission's YouTube website in 2 to 3 weeks approximately. You may interact with me at any time by using the chat feature located in the toolbar at the bottom of the presentation window. I am going to wait until the end of the presentation to respond to those comments. If you experience any technical issues, please visit Zoom at the site given on the shown on the PowerPoint. The overview of the presentation, we're going to talk just generally about TABC rules, what rules are, and how come we do them, and where we get our authority. We're going to talk about how the rulemaking process begins. We're going to talk about really the two stages in the rulemaking process. One is where the rule is published as a proposed rule, and we receive comment, and then we take it back to the Commission a second time for adoption. Then after that, in the conclusion, we'll talk about staying informed on rules and at the agency. In general, agency rules, and this applies to any agency, are statements of general applicability that implement or interpret a law or policy or describe the agency's procedural requirements. Rules do not include statements of internal management or organization of the agency. The Commission has broad authorization to make rules. Specifically, the Alcoholic Beverage Code provides that the Commission may prescribe and publish rules necessary to carry out the provisions of this code. There are also several specific laws that direct TABC to develop rules to accomplish specific purposes. And having just gone through the sunset process, we are looking at several mandates in the sunset legislation that will require us to be doing rules over the next several years. What is the impact of a TABC rule? The TABC rule is the law, the same way the code is the law. There are two consequences for violation of a rule. One is that violation itself is a misdemeanor. And on conviction, if no other penalty is specified, the violation is punishable by a $100 to $1,000 fine and or up to 1 year in jail. The second consequence is, if not a criminal violation, if we don't pursue a criminal violation, you still are exposed to cancellation or a 60-day suspension, up to a 60-day suspension of your license or permit for violating a rule. There are essentially two ways to begin the rulemaking process. One is for a TABC stakeholder to initiate the process by filing a petition for rulemaking. And the second, and really the more commonly used, is for the TABC staff to independently propose a rule or a rule amendment. Both of these processes rely heavily on stakeholder input. Rulemaking is really a collaborative process. In successful rulemaking, the staff considers input from stakeholders, and similarly in a petition for rulemaking, it's more likely to succeed and result in a new rule if the stakeholder consults with staff before filing. And that's because, as you will see in a few minutes here, the petition for rulemaking has some formalities associated with it, and if you consult with us beforehand, it would we can guide you through some of those things. There are certain rules about who can file a petition for rulemaking. You must be a Texas resident or a business entity located in Texas, or a government subdivision located in Texas, or a public or private organization located in Texas. It does not include a state agency. A state agency cannot petition us for rulemaking. The rules about what has to be contained in a petition for rulemaking are in our commission rules, specifically Rule 31.3. In creating the petition for rulemaking, there's no particular form that must be used, but it must be in writing, and it must address these issues. One is the petitioner's name, address, organization, or affiliation, if any. Two is a statement of why the rule or amendment is desirable, the public good to be served, and any effect on those who would have to comply with the rule. Three is, state estimated fiscal impact on state and local government, estimated economic impact on persons required to comply with the rule, and whether there might be an effect on local employment, a statement of TABC's authority to adopt the requested rule or amendment, the proposed text of the new or amended rule, and a list of persons or organizations likely to be interested or affected by the requested rule or amendment. If you can't address any of these items that are required, then you have to explain why you can't address them. The one that's really essential, absolutely, is the proposed text. The petition for rulemaking is not triggered, the process is not triggered by just bringing us an idea, something that ought to be addressed in a rulemaking. The petition for rulemaking is a formal document that does require the text that you would like to see in a rule. The process is started by submitting the petition to the TABC Executive Director's Office, and the rule specifies two ways that can be done, either by mail or by hand delivery. Those addresses are given on the PowerPoint. A petition is considered submitted on the date it is received, and it's important that these deadlines and the way that it's submitted are important because there is a timeline associated with the petition for rulemaking process. The receipt date starts a 60-day timeline within which the TABC must accept or deny the petition. TABC's review of the petition, the executive director, after staff reviews it, makes its input, the executive director presents the petition to the commission and makes a recommendation to accept or deny the petition. If the commission has already considered a petition for the same rule in the last year, the executive director may refuse to present the petition to the commission. The commission considers the petition at an open meeting and accepts public comments during the open meeting on the petition. If the petition is accepted, TABC will initiate a rulemaking proceeding by publishing the rule in the Texas Register. If the petition is denied, the petitioner will get notification in writing with the reasons for denial. There is no statutory appeal of a denied petition. If no commission decision is reached, in 60 days after the petition was received, TABC will initiate a rulemaking proceeding, again by publishing the proposed rule in the Texas Register. The second method of beginning the rulemaking process that I mentioned earlier, and more common, is the TABC staff initiating the process. The commission the staff may initiate a rulemaking if the commission fails to act or accepts the stakeholders' petition for review, as I mentioned. Another reason is the Texas legislature passes new laws directing TABC to create rules. A statutory directive that agencies regularly review existing rules. That's in the government code and requires every agency to review its rules periodically. And then also just issues that arise in the changing alcoholic beverage industry. These may be raised by stakeholders in formal or informal conversations with staff. They may come from input received at executive summits or roundtables conducted by our executive staff. In the process of developing marketing practice advisories, we may get information that leads us to believe that perhaps a rule is better addressed to address the situation than a marketing practice advisory, or we just gather information that helps us in some other rulemaking. If we get a specific stakeholder complaint, we may look at it, whether it's, even if the stakeholder doesn't file a petition for rulemaking, if staff considers the complaint and thinks a rule is appropriate to address it, then the staff might present a rule. Any conversations with a stakeholder held by staff, and including those that happen on the ongoing regulatory and enforcement activities by the Commission. When the staff decides to initiate a rulemaking proceeding, the first thing really is to develop the concept. Is what would a rule look like? Is the rule a good idea? Who's going to be affected? What are the downsides? What are the benefits? With that, we next engage in drafting a rule, and then the draft of the rule goes through the initial executive review of the agency. The next step after the executive staff approves it is for the discussion draft, as we call it, to go out and be discussed at an initial stakeholder meeting. This process is not required by law, but it is something the agency has implemented in order to maximize our input from stakeholders. The stakeholder meeting is an informal process. It's where TABC presents the discussion draft and stakeholders engage in open dialogue with the TABC staff about the rule's potential impact. TABC staff uses the stakeholder feedback to improve the rule draft before presenting it to the Commission for publication as a proposed rule. That process is proposed rule must be placed on the Commission meeting agenda before the Commission can consider it. The Commission can really only act in an open meeting. TABC must file the meeting agenda with the Texas Register at least 7 days prior to the Commission meeting. Stakeholders can access the Texas Register for those open meeting notices at the Secretary of State's website given on the PowerPoint. At the Commission meeting considering the proposed rule, staff will make a recommendation to the Commissioners. Stakeholders have an opportunity to present public comment on the proposal to publish the rule. The Commission then decides whether to publish the rule for comment as recommended, to modify it and publish it, or to not publish the rule. If the Commission votes to publish the proposed rule, then we submit it to the Secretary of State for publication as a proposed rule in the Texas Register. Publication takes place about 2 to 3 weeks after the Commission meeting. The rule publication begins the formal comment period. The comment period consists of 2 types of comments: written comments. Typically, stakeholders have up to 30 days after publication to submit written comments. The Commission may prescribe longer or shorter period of time to receive written comments, but 30 days is pretty typical. Oral comments. Stakeholders may also attend a public hearing held by staff on the proposed rules to provide oral comments. The hearing date is set in the rule preamble when the rule gets published in the Texas Register. Stakeholders are entitled to a Commission response to these formal written comments or oral comments made at a public hearing. The Commission stakeholders may provide input to TABC on proposed rules through informal consultations, and TABC may appoint committees of experts or stakeholders to advise on rulemaking. When the public comment period ends, TABC staff reviews the public comments and then makes a recommendation to the commission, again, to adopt the rule as proposed, adopt the rule with revision, or withdraw the rule. After the commission considers, adoption of the proposed rule must be placed on the commission's meeting agenda with 7 days notice of the commission meeting. And again, stakeholders may give public comments on whether the rule should be adopted or withdrawn. The commission may, as I indicated, adopt a rule with a revision, as long as the revision does not affect new people or new topics. If the revision does affect new people or new topics, republication in the Texas Register is required, so the rulemaking process essentially starts over before the commission can vote to adopt it. So there's another opportunity in that process to consider the rule with the new revisions. If a rule is adopted by the commission, the rule generally becomes effective 20 days after the TAB submits the rule and preamble to the Secretary of State. The commission can specify a later date when it adopts the rule. The Texas Register will indicate the effective date when it publishes the adopted rule preamble. The official text of the rule can always be found in the Texas Administrative Code, which is again maintained by the Secretary of State at the Texas Register's office. If a rule is withdrawn, TABC either submits a withdrawal notice to the Texas Register, or the commissioners may let it be withdrawn by inaction. If no action is taken within 6 months of the publication date, then the rule is automatically withdrawn by action of law. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, a person cannot seek an appeal of the agency's denial of a petition for rulemaking or of a failure to adopt a rule. There are several ways to stay informed on the Commission's rulemakings. One is to get email notifications. To do this, you can contact the Texas Register office at the number given or the website listed on the slide, and identify the agency for which you want to receive notices. This allows you to get email notices for agency rulemaking actions, open meetings, requests for proposals, public hearings, etc. To get email notifications directly from TABC, look for the industry notifications button at the top of TABC's website. It's shown on this slide. Click the red button and sign up for the email list. With this, you'll get notices from TABC on stakeholder meetings, commission meetings, advisories, rulemaking actions, and other important alerts. Also, the TABC posts commission meeting information at the TABC's website under the Agency Meetings tab. So to summarize the presentation, there are two ways to initiate rulemaking. Either the TABC stakeholder can file a petition for rulemaking, or a TABC staff can propose a rule. The TABC relies heavily on stakeholders in the rulemaking process, regardless of whether it's a petition for rulemaking or a staff-initiated rule. It takes at least 2 commission meetings and 2 votes by the commission to adopt a rule finally. The first, the commission meeting has to vote to publish a proposed rule for comment, and then the second meeting, the commission has to meet to adopt a proposed rule. A rule is not effective until the date indicated in the adopted rule preamble that is published in the Texas Register. And you can get notifications of TABC rulemaking actions by emailing or calling the Texas Register or signing up for TABC's industry notification emails. I don't see any questions that have yet been posted. If you have questions about the presentation, now is a good time to post them using the chat feature. And otherwise, you are always free to email your questions to the stakeholder at tabc.gov, tabc.texas.gov, as shown on this slide. And we're waiting now for just a minute to see if anybody has any questions.